Imagine being the first person to taste a royal feast, not for indulgence, but to stare death in the face with every bite. What if the soup is poisoned? What if the bread is laced with death? The king's safety rests on your tongue. But who is keeping you safe? Today, step into the shoes of a royal food taster in medieval times and discover what truly made their daily life a mix of fear, strategy, and survival. You wake up to the dull ache of a stiff mattress beneath you, and the faint light of dawn slipping through the tiny unglazed window of your room. It's a space barely big enough to stretch your arms with a single wooden bench stacked against one wall and a sagging cot in the corner. The air carries the smell of yesterday's fires and the faintly sharp scent of yeast rising in the kitchens just downstairs. Comfort isn't something you expect, not when your job is less about living in luxury and more about surviving, meal to meal. You know what the day has in store, and it's enough to make even the smell of freshly baked bread lose all appeal. Your quarters, cramped and tucked into the underbelly of the castle near the kitchen, are designed for practicality, not relaxation. You're close enough to hear the clanging of pots and the muffled voices of cooks starting their day, yet the isolation from the rest of the castle estate speaks volumes. You may work for royalty, but you are far from its glittering centre. Proximity to the kitchens means you're on call at all hours. Early breakfasts, late-night banquets, it doesn't matter. When food is prepared, you're expected to be nearby, ready to taste, ready to risk. But that's tomorrow's problem, or later today's, depending on how schedules shift. For now, your first challenge is getting out of bed, knowing what awaits. Here's what's worse than the physical danger of your role, the mind games. Each morning starts with the same thought: will this be the day I die? It's not dramatic, it's just factual. Your work involves swallowing food that could very well be doctored with something meant to kill. And you don't even have to make a mistake for things to go horribly wrong. What if an ingredient was spoiled? What if poison wasn't the problem but carelessness was? If the king so much as sneezes after a meal, the eyes of suspicion will land squarely on you. That alone forces you onto your feet, groggy or not. The day has rituals and you can't miss a step. You start with washing, a habit drilled into you not just for cleanliness but for self-preservation. Scrub your face, rinse your hands, repeat. Any dirt or contaminant you carry into the kitchen risks not only the perception of your competence but also your life. If a wrong flavor, soap, ash, anything, clashes with one of the dishes, fingers will point, accusations will fly. Nobody in the royal court is looking for a scapegoat. They already have one. You. Already, the stress begins to gnaw at you. The act of waking up isn't just the end of sleep, it's the start of vigilance. Each movement feels like a small piece in an endless chess game you can't afford to lose. You're suspicious of everything: the change in air near the pots, the way a plate gleams under candlelight, even the twitch of an eyebrow on one of the guards pacing near the door. The people who work around you don't trust you, because why would they? If poisoning happens, you're either the first line of failure or, worse, part of the conspiracy. And even if the soldiers guarding the food aren't there to watch the cooks, they're always watching you. But before you head into those watchful gazes and that suffocating air of caution, there are rules to prepare yourself. Hygiene isn't optional. Your fingernails, your hair, the tunic you wear, it all has to be spotless. There are salons of paranoia swirling in kitchens like these, and many revolve around the tiniest of errors. Nobody wants to be the taster who was accused of tampering with a royal dish simply because a smudge of soot ended up on a goblet. Some tasters have been dragged off in shackles for mistakes just as small. The next part of your routine is psychological. You focus, center, and when able, rise above the simmering anxiety. Some tasters mutter prayers, clutch talismans hidden inside their sleeves, or rehearse conversations they'll never have with the nobles they serve. Who knows? Maybe that gives them comfort. You don't have the luxury of superstition. Instead, you double-check your tools, your spoon, your small knife, and the napkin you carry to wipe away any residue immediately. Some claim it's these tools and their cleanliness that prolong their lives, not luck. Whether it's true or not isn't your concern. Perception is everything. Finally, you leave your room, stepping directly into the muted chaos of early morning kitchens. The heat from fires feels aggressive against your skin, which is still cool from the damp air of the hallway. The kitchen staff barely acknowledges you, but not out of disrespect. It's more that your presence unsettles them. You're a reminder of how much can go wrong. And really, you probably make them nervous. You're the final barrier between their work and the royal stomach. A grim line of defense whose job description might as well read, "Be right or be dead." But you're not the only one keenly aware of the stakes. Cooks murmur to one another, shooting occasional glances your way. Whispers rise and fall as platters are arranged, and pieces of venison are chopped with precision. Meanwhile, guards stationed near the entrance lean against the frame, warding off any uninvited visitors, yet seem perfectly relaxed when it comes to observing you. They don't need to speak for you to hear their suspicion hovering behind their otherwise dull expressions. Every move you make in this kitchen is part performance, part survival strategy. Drinking some water from a communal pitcher, don't even try it. What if someone tampers with it while your back is turned? You've seen fellow tasters meticulously drink from predetermined cups or inspect water jugs before daring to touch their lips to anything provided. Paranoia isn't just a side effect here. It's a skill. And yet, no one says a word about the toll. When you sit down to tie your apron or prepare yourself with a breath, no one mentions the weight in your shoulders, the sweat already forming along your temple even though your duties have barely begun. It's just understood that the moment you walk through those wide wooden doors into the kitchen, the role of ordinary person vanishes. You're something entirely different now, a shield. You can't help but notice the way that door to the outside is now firmly latched, the way the brazier's brightness makes the room feel smaller and more fragile. There's an overwhelming heat, a sharp contrast to your icy nerves. Outside, a soft commotion stirs in the distance as castle staff begin their own tasks. You strain to hear whether anything feels out of place. Was there a hint of distress in those voices, a rushed shuffle? It's impossible to know. Some days, the unknown makes your skin crawl more than the reality of tasting what's in front of you. If there's one sure thing in this life, it's that danger doesn't announce itself. It just seeps in, unnoticed. By now, the activity around you grows louder, dishes beginning to pile, sauces bubbling away in iron pots, and bread pulled steaming from the ovens. People are shouting things in serviceable urgency, words that neither concern nor include you, and yet you know every single thing being prepared will soon pass your table in some form. Poison might not come with a scent, they say, but you'll still have to inhale deeply, check for anything. An out-of-place discoloration, a bitterness in even the gentlest pinch of flavor. Today, your instincts will serve as the first gate between the kitchens and the throne, and it's no small thing. The kitchen doors swing open, and the morning's brief stillness is entirely gone now. You feel the vibrations of movement, the fast step of braided boots against stone, and an immediate sharpness in the air that could just as well be from your own mind as from the physical commotion around you. Whatever calm you thought was possible is gone. It's time. The day fully comes alive as sacks of flour, crates of vegetables, and amphorae of wine are hauled into the kitchens. For you, though, this moment shifts everything into high alert, because before a single pot is stirred, you need to get up close with those raw ingredients. Every head of lettuce, jar of honey, wedge of cheese, all of it has to be scrutinized. Why? Simple. If poison enters this kitchen, it's likely hidden long before the first ladle hits the soup. This means pestering the cooks with their carefully mapped-out schedules and interrupting their flow just to verify that nothing sinister slipped through the cracks. Your role here isn't just about tasting finished dishes. It's also about spotting danger early, and spotting it in places where most people wouldn't even think to look. You run your hands over the sacks of grain, feeling for any punctures or tampering. You hover around the barrels brought in from merchants, catching a whiff of their contents like a bloodhound. Does the wine have an odd metallic smell? Does the flour feel strangely coarse? Even your eyes are weapons in this moment, scanning for discoloration in cuts of meat or anything that might scream off. It's slow, careful work, and yes, it's done in the middle of a bustling kitchen, which doesn't exactly make it easier. The chefs, predictably, scowl. They see you as little more than an obstacle between their artistry and the royal family. In fairness, when you're standing there sniffing their spices or pinching sprigs of herbs, it does feel like you're picking apart a masterpiece before it's even been assembled. But the stakes are too high to care about their feelings, especially when you know the reality of what could be lurking. Poisons, after all, come in deceptively unthreatening packages. Legends of the time said some were smuggled in using honey to mask their bitterness or mixed into ground spices where they'd be nearly invisible. Cinnamon spiked with arsenic, nutmeg dusted with powdered glass. The idea alone is stomach-turning, and it's exactly what keeps your vigilance razor sharp. The tools at your disposal are laughably simple, which doesn't make the job any easier. Sight, smell, taste, those are it. No fancy alchemical tests, no modern gadgets to analyze even trace amounts of toxins. Your instincts are your laboratory, and they have to work overtime. Take spices, for example. Expensive, rare, and coveted by traveling merchants, spices were often seen as both a luxury and a perfect vehicle for poison. Their strong flavors could mask even the deadliest substances. A pinch of saffron might not just carry the price of gold, it could carry death. You'd know this, of course, because you've been reminded on repeat to approach anything potent or pungent with triple the caution. That sprinkle of imported clove might as well come with a skull and crossbones stamped on the jar. Liquids are another nightmare. Wines feel especially suspicious, with poison able to dissolve into their depths far better than in solid food. Each barrel demands a thorough taste, not a gulp, but certainly enough to gauge the purity. You've learned to wait and listen after each sip, catching the sounds of your heartbeat in your temples and the slight churn of heat in your stomach. No immediate dizziness, no strange aftertaste, fine. But the tension never quite leaves. After all, medieval poisons weren't always about instant kills. Some were designed to chew away invisibly, working their damage over hours or even days. You've probably heard stories of tasters who initially passed the test, only to collapse hours later. As grim as it all is, there are cases that stick in your mind, payoffs in this grim game of detection that reinforce the importance of what you're doing. One particular legend whispers about a taster in a European court who noticed something unusual in a silver goblet of wine before the cup even reached the monarch's lips. Accounts claim he caught a faint, sour tang the moment he raised the drink. Sure enough, upon further examination, it was found to be laced with aconite, better known as wolfsbane. It's these small victories, these fleeting moments of saving a life, usually someone else's, of course, that offer any sense of purpose in a job that otherwise feels like walking a tightrope blindfolded. But, naturally, every task you complete is still carried out under watchful, often skeptical eyes. The guards loom near as you pick through barrels and crates, their presence both a comfort and a constant reminder of your precarious position. Are they watching your back, or are they just looking for any sign of incompetence in your movements? You steal a glance now and then, wondering if any of them are second, guessing their decision to spare this barrel or that bunch of herbs when it passed through the castle gates. Maybe they'd rather be tearing the pantry apart themselves, though it's hard to imagine them inspecting the third jar of jam with the same caution you do. At the very least, they act as a barrier against lazy merchants, ensuring that only pre-approved vendors get within striking distance of the royal supplies. On occasion, though, suspicion isn't just about the ingredients themselves, it's about the hands involved in delivering them. The food taster could spend as much time analyzing the merchants as their goods, making sure there's no trace of nervous energy lingering in the air that doesn't belong. A shaky hand while handing over a bag of figs. A peculiar hesitation when asked where the produce was sourced from. It's all catalogued, quietly, even if you don't bring it up right away. And if something does feel wrong, if that barrel smells faintly of almonds when it shouldn't, for example, you flag it immediately. Those responsible are sent away for questioning, with guards dragging them off to places you don't, and probably shouldn't, know about. On good days, the process of weeding out threats ends here. There are no odd smells, no jittery merchants, no suspicious barrels delivered from unnamed parts of the region. But good days are a rare commodity. Most of the time, your brain is already spinning from the various ways these ingredients could cause harm, whether through human tampering or natural spoilage. That bitterness in the butter? It might just be old, but is it worth risking someone's life to find out? Every small anomaly becomes a riddle, and there's no answer key beyond your own experience. Sifting through all this doesn't leave much time to feel anything, let alone hunger or exhaustion, though both creep in at some point. Still, there's no room to falter when the stakes are this high, especially when the cooks eventually begin calling your name, signaling that your inspection of the pantry has run long enough. They're ready to move forward, and if they're ready, it means you'll soon be tasting things that actually spent time over a fire. Satisfied, or as satisfied as one can ever really be, you let out a breath you didn't even realize you were holding. The ingredients have passed your initial examination. The vegetables look fresh, the grain is intact, and the wine hasn't claimed your consciousness so far. Everything is in motion now, like an oversized clock grinding inexorably toward its next moment. But deep down, you know just how early in the process this still is. If there's any poison to speak of, it might still be waiting, hidden under layers of golden crusts or veiled in silky sauces yet to be prepared. No amount of sniffs or glances will save you when you're face to face with the finished dish. The cooks begin simmering, stirring, and seasoning each carefully constructed creation, oblivious to the heightened pulse you haven't quite managed to calm. Before long, knives flash over boards, and pots hiss with steam. The raw becomes cooked, turning into something far more sinister for you, a meal that's ready to be tasted. Now, once again, the danger doubles. The ingredients might have passed the first test, but the real challenge is just beginning. The question you ask yourself, over and over again, is this: how can something so small cause so much damage? Poisons in medieval times hid behind innocence, a glimmer of sweetness, or the rich aroma of a well-prepared stew. They weren't just weapons, they were patience embodied, the deadliest tools of power and betrayal. And understanding them wasn't a luxury for you, it was survival. Arsenic was the celebrity of the poison world, a dull, tasteless powder that blended effortlessly into anything it touched. You'd never smell it, never see it, just bite, chew, swallow, and wait. The symptoms crept in like a slow thunderstorm: nausea, stomach pain, vomiting. The final punishment came when your body gave up fighting, collapsing from violent convulsions or organ failure. To make things worse, arsenic wasn't just deadly, it was everywhere. People of the time didn't have the luxury of banning it. It lived in dyes, medicines, even makeup. And if some clever noble wanted to weaponize it, well, meals were just one of countless places it could secretly shine. If arsenic was the subtle assassin, belladonna was its more dramatic cousin. Known also as deadly nightshade, it lived up to every ounce of its name. Just a few berries from this plant could destroy even the hardiest soul. And here's the thing about belladonna that made it so dangerous for you: its symptoms were confusing. The victim's heart would race, their pupils would dilate, and confusion would set in. The line between poison and fright could blur. Was the royal sweating because the soup was tampered with? Or was it the heat of the roaring fire in the dining hall? Thankfully, belladonna sometimes betrayed itself with a bitter taste, but even that wasn't a guarantee. It thrived on subtlety, a quick dose here, a stirred-in extract there. Then there was hemlock. It didn't cause chaos so much as slow, paralyzing dread. A favorite in ancient times, hemlock had this unnerving habit of sneaking up on its victim. First, you'd feel a numbness creeping into your limbs. Then, as it spread, you'd slowly lose control, your muscles locking into place until, finally, you couldn't even catch your breath. Death by hemlock wasn't a spectacle of gore, it was soft, quiet, and deeply terrifying. Some called it the philosopher's poison, made infamous by Socrates, and tales of its use lingered long after. These were the big players, but even these barely scratched the surface. The medieval world wasn't short on deadly plants, minerals, and concoctions. Monkshood, foxglove, opium, mercury, all had their turn in this macabre dance. Some targeted your stomach, bubbling with pain before the rest of your body gave up. Others aimed straight for your heart or nervous system, delivering quick but brutal results. Even the food itself could be death in disguise without a helping hand from an assassin. Spoiled meat, rancid fats, or improperly prepared fish could mimic the symptoms of poisoning. Good luck explaining the difference to a room full of panicking nobles. This meant you, as a food taster, weren't just checking for flavors. You were playing detective, trained to notice any detail that felt even slightly off within minutes or sometimes seconds of sampling a dish. Was that coppery aftertaste a sign of contamination, or just leftover residue from the pan used to saute the venison? Did that twinge in your stomach mean you were in trouble, or had you simply swallowed too quickly in your nervous attempt to get through another tasting? Hyper-awareness wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. Meals weren't just meals for you, they were tests, as if every dish had its own multiple-choice quiz. And the questions didn't end after you swallowed. Sitting with the food in your stomach for the next hour became its own kind of torment. Symptoms could hit immediately, or they could take hours or even days to emerge. Slow-acting poisons turned this job into a constant state of uncertainty. Imagine tasting a rich meat pie at noon, only to wake hours later with your heart pounding uncontrollably in the middle of the night. Your labor didn't stop at the table, your body became its own battleground long after the last bite was taken. Take the story of a taster in Florence, his name mostly forgotten, though his fate guaranteed immortality. The legend goes like this. During an extravagant banquet, he sampled roasted capons seasoned with a particularly fragrant herb mixture. No bitterness, no smell of almonds, the supposed warning sign for cyanide. Nothing unusual. He gave the all clear, the dish was sent to the Duke, and the evening carried on without incident. But by midnight, the taster found himself in agony, clutching his abdomen as sweating chills set in. By dawn, he was dead. The the victim of what experts now suspect was a dose of something slow yet relentless, possibly powdered glass laced into the seasoning. The Duke, on the other hand, survived without a scratch. After all, that's what the food taster was there for. Even in cases where poisoning was suspected but didn't occur, the symptoms of paranoia could take a toll almost as severe. An odd taste in a royal wine might cause the monarch to act in panic, and guess who was standing closest? You. Your every reaction, if you blinked too hard, sighed too loudly, paused too long before swallowing, would be analysed. Did you twitch because the gravy was poisoned, or was it just the burn of salt? This wasn't just about physical safety. You had to project control over your body, even when your instincts told you to panic. The truly terrifying part was the unpredictability of it all. Unlike today, there was no manual or checklist guaranteed to catch poisons. Poisons were creative, insidious, and blended seamlessly with dishes designed to dazzle. Glistening honeyed fruits, spiced meats, even crystallized candies, it didn't matter. You always had to assume danger, because assuming otherwise might cost your life. And then there were the poisons that didn't give warnings. None of the classic symptoms, no telltale nausea or writhing cramps, just sudden unconsciousness followed by death. Aquatofana, for instance, gained notoriety centuries later as a slow-acting poison that presented no symptoms until it was far too late. A taster's worst nightmare, though thankfully rare, or so you hoped. Survival wasn't just about food either. It was about knowing when to trust your surroundings or when to question them. You watched not only the food but also the hands that prepared it, the faces of the cooks, the merchants who delivered the supplies. Suspicion stretched far beyond the plate. And even if no poison was there to harm you, suspicion could still ruin you. False accusations of missing a sign were enough to cost a taster their reputation or their life. Few nobles cared to consider nuance when their life hung in the balance. Still, even poison wasn't always the killer in your line of work. The pressure of constant vigilance, the toll of living under suspicion, the physical and emotional strain of it weighed heavy. Surviving one meal meant nothing if the next one killed you. Poisons weren't just dangerous because they could kill. They were dangerous because they forced you to live every second of every day as though they would. And here's the kicker. There was no way to fully know. No way to guarantee you'd catch it. Testing food in medieval times wasn't science. It was instinct. It was trusting your nose, your gut, the very faintest signals of your body that something was wrong. And even if you trusted yourself completely, there was still the inevitability of the unknown. What if the poison tasted like nothing at all? What if it wasn't in the food but in the tankard you drank from afterward? What if someone watched you test one dish, only to tamper with another the moment you turned away? As you sit back after sampling yet another suspicious course, these thoughts linger. And even if you feel nothing now, that lingering fear never fully fades. Because even if you survive the tasting process today, this job doesn't offer guarantees. Survival is borrowed time, and every second comes at an unspeakable cost. Your tools as a food taster were, let's say, underwhelming. If you were hoping for an arsenal of clever gadgets to help you sniff out trouble, try again. Most of what you had was physically part of you. Your eyes, your nose, and unfortunately your tongue. All the high-stakes drama of catching poison relied on nothing more than your ordinary human senses, honed into survival instincts through repetition and fear. Still, while no tool could guarantee your safety, there were a few methods and items in your corner. Kind of. Let's start with silver. Not your silver tongue. That wouldn't help here. Actual silver. It was whispered in royal courts and villages alike that silver utensils could reveal arsenic if it was present in food or drink. The idea was simple. The poison would react with the metal, causing it to discolor or tarnish. Those whispered claims, however, were about as reliable as a medieval map of the world. While there's some truth in silver being able to detect certain toxins like sulfur compounds, it wasn't a foolproof solution. Too many people placed faith in this trick without realizing that arsenic, your top suspect, rarely cooperated by giving off obvious signs. At best, the silver method was luck masquerading as science, which is a dangerous game when your life is at stake. Then there were animals. In some wealthier courts, tasters weren't the only ones risking their necks for a clean forkful of pheasant. Dogs, birds, and on particularly grim occasions, even sacrificial small livestock were used to graze lightly poisoned scraps. The thinking was barbarically straightforward. If the animal keeled over, you'd know to steer clear of the plate. The problem? This was a deeply flawed system. Animals might show different reactions to poisons than humans, or they'd need higher doses to exhibit symptoms. That tiny sprinkle of powdered hemlock meant to weaken a king might not even faze a goose. So, if the royal spaniel strolled off unharmed, it didn't exactly mean you could dig into dinner feeling confident. And speaking of unreliable helps, it's time to talk about stones, or, more famously, the myth of poison, detecting gems. You might have heard of bezoar stones, prized little lumps of mineral or calcified material harvested from the stomachs of goats and wild ruminants. Supposedly, these stones neutralized poison, or at least, that's what the desperate believed. To use one, a taster might drop a stone into a chalice of wine or place it against their skin while eating, trusting it to do something. The truth is that, scientifically speaking, bezoars have about as much poison-detecting ability as a polished river rock, but the myth persisted because when you're eating under constant threat of death, you'll cling to any glimmer of hope. In fact, the myth of poison-detecting stones extended beyond bezoars. Certain royal households invested obscene amounts of wealth in gemstones like amethysts or emeralds, believing these glittering prizes would change color or crack if exposed to toxins. Spoiler alert, they didn't. No emerald in history has ever saved a meal from being laced with powdered arsenic. But in a world awash in paranoia, sometimes belief was just as important as function. If a ruler thought they were safer dining under the watchful eye of a gemstone, that served its own purpose. Not for you, though. Your safety wasn't tethered to illusions. This brings us back to your senses. Because when it came down to real-life tools you could rely on, everything hinged on how carefully you observed your surroundings. Your nose, for example, was a decent early warning system. Some poisons had a distinct smell, though hardly any of the deadliest ones did. So, while you might catch a tangy bitterness in honey that should have tasted sweet, sometimes the dishes paraded in front of you emitted not a whiff of suspicion. You could sniff all day, but poisons like arsenic, cyanide, or aqua tofana weren't much for announcing themselves. Then there was taste, the most dangerous tool in your arsenal and, quite literally, your job description. This wasn't about savoring a meal. It was about pinpointing the subtleties of flavor your tongue had been trained to recognize. Is there an unnatural metallic tang? Good luck trusting that while your adrenaline's already yelling in your ears. While some poisons offered faint clues, others wouldn't register at all until they began tearing through your insides well after you'd raised the all-clear flag. It was a gut-twisting gamble, one you had to repeat day after day. But here's the thing. Tasting wasn't just about identifying poison as it hit your tongue. It became a test of every other part of your body. You learned to notice the smallest change, flush creeping over your skin, the twinge of heat behind your eyes, the rhythm of your heart skipping just slightly. In those minutes after you ate, your body became both an alarm system and an executioner, and you had no way of knowing which one it would choose to be until the process played out. That's why many food tasters became hyper-aware of these signals, second-guessing internal sensations as if their lives depended on it, because they did. And let's not forget, you weren't the only one paying attention. The guards by the kitchen door? They weren't just there to stop intruders, they were watching you. If your hand hesitated before taking a bite, if you shifted uncomfortably as you swallowed, if you so much as coughed too early, the immediate suspicion wasn't that something in the food was wrong. It was that you were up to something. The tools might have been limited, but the judgments weren't. Still, it's hard to ignore how thin these defenses really were. Sure, you might get away with flagging the occasional obvious threat, an odd color in a sauce, a rare pungency in the wine, but the truly lethal poisons, the ones that blended seamlessly with the food, they were still out there, waiting for the taster, no matter how thorough or careful. Ironically, as much as these tools and techniques existed to protect you, they also piled onto the stress of your day. The very fact that everything offered such shaky reassurance only heightened your awareness of just how vulnerable you were. And worse, even if the food wasn't poisoned, using these tools sometimes gave people a false sense of security. A silver spoon didn't tarnish, then the meal must be fine. Go ahead, downright devour it. A pigeon ate some scraps and didn't keel over? Excellent, dig in with abandon. Except, of course, you knew better. None of it truly guaranteed your safety. It was window dressing, a handful of rituals to make everyone feel just a bit less nervous about their steaming plates. But for you, the fear always lingered. In the end, there was no amount of preparation that compared to the reality of your final test, tasting the food yourself. Sure, a lucky strike with silver, animals, or stones might catch a poorly hidden dose of venom here and there, but no tool, no matter how revered or mythical, could fully shoulder the burden you carried. The final authority was always your own senses, your own body even as they constantly betrayed you with paranoia and doubt. Even now, as you drop that silver spoon into a polished basin and glance at a partridge steaming on the counter, you remind yourself of one simple truth. No tricks, no tools, no prayers to poison-detecting stones could change the fact that the next bite you take might kill you. And yet, the taste test lies ahead because no one else is going to do it for you. The meal is ready, plated, polished, and paraded out as if it were a priceless relic rather than tonight's dinner. It's presented with the sort of intense formality you'd expect from a royal court. The servants perfectly in sync as dishes clatter lightly into position. To anyone else, it would just look like an impressive feast, a celebration of abundance, the kind of spread that might make lesser nobles mutter jealous prayers into their thin soups. But for you, this is the closest you'll get to a battlefield. It's silent, full of expectation, and incredibly dangerous. Before you taste anything, you have to endure the ceremony of being watched closely. Guards, cooks, attendants, they're all there, faces as blank as freshly scrubbed plates, but eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. No one says it outright, but you know what they're waiting for. A tremor in the hand as you pick up the first spoon, a bead of sweat breaking across your forehead, anything to suggest hesitation, guilt, or, worst of all, fear. The room may be full of food, but the intense quiet creates the eerie sense that every noise is too loud. The scrape of your chair against the stones, the soft clink of a goblet as it settles. The question you keep thinking about, over and over, is, will this be the bite that ends it all? And if it is, will anyone even care? The first dish arrives in front of you, something hearty, likely meat, spiced and roasted to perfection. You can see the effort in its preparation, the golden shine from the juices catching the light, the smell tinged with warm herbs and smoke. A feast like this could have been the work of a dozen hands, all coordinated to impress the royal palate. But there's a small chance that one of those hands slipped something unwanted into the mix. That's the part people forget. The best poisons don't call attention to themselves. They lurk in the richest sauces and the tiniest garnishes, undetectable until your limbs go heavy or your breath begins to falter. You go through the motions anyway, pretending to focus on the flavors rather than your own racing heart. You cut a small, deliberate piece of the meat, slowly bringing it to your mouth. The guards stay glued to every movement. Even the servants across the room, clearing unnecessary plates, seem to slow down just enough to glance over. The balance here is delicate. Too quick, and you look careless like you aren't actually doing your job. Too slow, and you might seem distrusting, hesitant like you know something they don't. Neither impression is good. The actual act of tasting goes faster than you'd think. A bite, a chew, then a moment of waiting. You've done this enough times to know what to look for. Metallic bitterness, unfamiliar textures, or an abrupt burning sensation where there shouldn't be one. But today, nothing. It tastes fine. Maybe even too fine. A recipe executed perfectly, designed to please, and yet your chest feels tight anyway. Not from poison, just from the weight of expectation and the possibility that something could still be wrong. Once the bite is swallowed, you don't get to relax. Ever. Now comes the waiting period, the part they never show in medieval dramas because it's probably too uncomfortable to watch. Everyone in the room holds their breath. Did you cough? Did your eyelid twitch? Your own body betrays you by making even the most innocent sensations feel suspect. A sharp pang in your stomach, a tingle in the back of your throat under normal circumstances. You'd dismiss those things entirely. Right now, though, they're bait for paranoia. Surviving one bite isn't enough. The next bit of food arrives, maybe vegetables this time, steamed and tossed with an unfamiliar dressing. You're forced to start the entire process over again. Tiny piece, intense glares, a swallow into the unknown, and then another wait. Always the wait. What you hate most isn't the food or even the fear of poison, it's the war with yourself. Is your breathing a little more shallow than usual, or are you just imagining it after hours of anxiety? Sometimes, you have to find ways to keep people guessing. Even a food taster isn't entirely without their own tactics. There's an old story of a taster working at a French court who once paused mid-bite and let his eyes narrow dramatically at the plate in front of him. He didn't actually taste any poison, he admitted as much later in private, but the reaction sent an immediate wave of chaos through the kitchen staff. The head cook was dragged aside and rattled with questions about the preparation process. Another servant accidentally revealed a detail about a supplier who'd been acting strangely earlier. Turned out, there wasn't poison on the plate. but the suppliers' wagons were later found to be carrying barrels of spoiled wine, potentially deadly. It's the kind of move you'd only pull if you were desperate at faking suspicion to expose negligence. But the risk? Tremendous. If you pause or fake hesitation and no threat is found, there's only one person who looks guilty: you. Beyond the performance of it, the ritual of tasting and surviving, there's the knife-like knowledge that none of it is truly over, even when the food is cleared for service. Why? Because the act of eating doesn't guarantee safety. Bubonic plague, it is not the threat from poison, works slowly in many cases, simmering in the body long after the meal ends. A food taster in a German court once famously approved a dish served at an intimate gathering of nobles. It wasn't until well after the initial feast, hours later, that he began to feel the creeping sickness in his skin, followed by the collapse of his legs beneath him. Accounts suggest it was an arsenic-laced glaze brushed over a roasted chicken. The royal survived, but he didn't. The delay is often the assassin's ace card, making survival a cruel fiction until time proves otherwise. Even if you're confident, nothing will happen if every single taste test passes without incident. There's always the unnerving after-party, the whispers. Court life is full of suspicion, and poison isn't just a weapon, it's a rumor machine. You're never truly off duty because someone somewhere is casually planting the idea that you might have slipped something into the food during the tasting process. A sudden illness in the royal family the next week. People might side-eye the meats or the wine, but they'll never forget the taster. Few roles in life combine duty and distrust as completely as yours. The meal, as far as anyone can tell, goes well. There are no immediate signs of trouble in you or in the plates that follow. The guards relax at least slightly, and the courtiers take their turns poking at their portions with little silver forks. Your job here is done for the time being, but the residue of unease sticks with you, like grease that refuses to wash off. Is this how you're supposed to feel at the end of it all? Like you've walked through flames only to find smoke still clinging to your clothes? The plates are cleared away, the laughter at the royal table growing louder as the feast winds down. But for you, this moment doesn't feel celebratory. Whether you've lived an hour longer or a day longer, you don't truly know where the needle falls between safety and betrayal. While everyone else reaches for a parting cup of wine or a final sugared date, you're left wondering which of those bites might come back to haunt you hours later. And as comforting as survival might sound, the truth is far more complicated. Meals end, but for you, the danger has only just begun. You've done everything right. The food smelled fine, tasted fine, looked fine. You took your cautious bites, swallowed hard against the rising panic, and waited, just like always. Yet, as the evening unfolds, things start to spiral. Maybe the king clutches his stomach during supper, or the queen turns even more pale than usual. Whispers start to echo back through the hallways of the great hall, rumors taking on lives of their own. The food might not even be to blame, maybe it's just a seasonal fever or bad water, but none of that matters when royal suspicion starts settling on you like a storm cloud. Being the food taster means you're not just the first line of defense, it also means you're always the first in line for blame. Here's the brutal reality of your position. If anything goes wrong with a royal meal, your innocence is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you tasted every bite, or if you were as careful as a monk transcribing holy texts. When someone at the table gets sick, especially if that someone wears a crowned court doesn't default to the idea that the chefs used spoiled duck or someone forgot to boil the wine long enough. They default to the idea that either you failed or you were actively complicit. Royal feasts lived under the spectre of paranoia, and the food taster was the easiest scapegoat, a convenient human shield who could either deflect suspicion or absorb it entirely. If the court decides you failed, the punishments can be grim. Unless evidence showed an obvious, untraceable outside assassin, a poisoned goblet slipped in when no one was looking, the mantle of responsibility rested squarely on your shoulders. You'd be interrogated first. Not because they expected a full confession, they rarely did, but because suspicion demanded it. Did you check the ingredients carefully? Did you hesitate for too long before swallowing that initial bite? Did you look nervous around the cooks, the merchants, the platters? Even things as small as a poorly timed cough could be brought up against you. Every action you've taken that day is now being replayed like an accusation. Every glance, every breath disassembled for potential guilt. Now, the methods of interrogation were rarely kind. For a medieval royal court, the idea of justice leaned heavily toward showmanship. Maybe the guards sit you down before the council, demanding simple answers at first. Who brought in the supplies? Did anyone act suspicious around the kitchens? For you, this process might feel endless. If they believe you were in on it, somehow bribed by shadowy traitors, or convinced to betray the throne, the outcome takes on an entirely different level of cruelty. Torture wasn't always the next step, but it was never off the table either, particularly if the ruler in question wanted to make an example out of you. After all, what better way to prevent conspiracies than ensuring everyone knows what happens to a taster deemed untrustworthy? Take, for example, the tale often whispered from Renaissance Italy. A taster named Ruggero, tasked with ensuring the Pope's safety during a routine dinner, approved a platter of elaborate, gilded pastries. By evening's end, it wasn't a corpse they were left with, but a violently ill Pope, whose fate hung precariously between survival and the afterlife. Ruggero swore he'd tasted everything, followed every precaution, but the murmurs in the courtroom were louder than his protests. He was accused of either incompetence or treachery. Does it really matter which? While the full records of his ultimate punishment have faded into the fog of history, accounts suggest his interrogation didn't end with clearance or vindication. The Pope recovered. Ruggero didn't. Punishments weren't limited to beatings, exile, or executions, though all dramatic options as they were. Imprisonment was often the merciful alternative. You might find yourself locked away in a damp, stinking cell, labelled forever as treasonous or inept. In some cases, this wasn't even a temporary penalty, but a lifelong one, because dead men at least make for clean endings, while prisoners languishing in the dark serve as continuous, tangible reminders of what it means to cross authority. But let's back up for a moment, because sometimes you didn't even need someone to fall ill for troubles to find you. The atmosphere surrounding royal courts touched everything with suspicion, creating an environment where just the possibility of failure was enough to turn people against you. Think about it. If someone powerful wanted to remove you from your role, they'd only need a minor excuse. Did the roast you tested feel slightly off to the king's tongue today? Did a merchant spread a quiet rumor about the way you handled the kitchen inventory? You could find yourself condemned for imagined poisons that never even existed. Beyond these grandiose punishments, the day-to-day paranoia itself was crushing. Being a food taster meant living in a constant state of calculated caution, not just with the food, but regarding everyone around you. You had enemies you didn't even know existed. Court politics ensured that ambitious rivals, jealous cooks, even bored courtiers looking to earn favour with the royals by exposing treachery. The layers to this game were endless, and no one liked to remind you that you were as disposable as the scraps left on the table at the end of the feast. One particularly harrowing story involves a food taster named Sebastian working for a notoriously paranoid king in Castile. Sebastian allegedly approved every aspect of a grand meal, inspecting the meat, tasting the wine, examining the sauces, but by morning, rumours had swirled through the court that the king had woken feeling ill. The source? A mild, unrelated headache, likely from the stress of governing or overeating, given the descriptions of the feast. None of this mattered. By midday, Sebastian was subjected to public questioning, and even though there wasn't a speck of poison evidence, the damage was done. Guards marched him to the edges of the castle, where it said he was banished under threat of death should he ever return. Did Sebastian survive long out in the wild on his own? Most say it's unlikely. It was winter, and the surrounding region wasn't exactly forgiving. The most painful truth of all was the absolute thanklessness of the role. Food tasters existed in this strange limbo between trust and suspicion. You were trusted to protect someone too important to risk themselves. Yet, at the same time, trust didn't extend far enough for anyone to believe in your innocence should something go wrong. Even kings who weren't poisoned or threatened often neglected to provide much gratitude to their tasters. The work was expected, routine, a royal entitlement rather than something to be celebrated. So, when things went well, when you successfully sniffed out spoiled wine or raised concern over suspicious shipments, you didn't exactly walk away showered in awards. You just kept the job you already hated. And there you were, every decision scrutinized, every mistake amplified. Yet, you kept showing up, taking that first bite, time and time again. Why? Because, strange as it may seem, this role came with its perk zones you'd have likely weighed against the risk the moment you accepted the position. Now the question is, were those perks worth it? Let's move on to find out. Why would anyone choose to live like this? Day after day of walking straight into danger, chewing their way through potential death traps. At first glance, you'd think no one would willingly agree to it. But here's the thing: being a food taster wasn't just about the risks. It was about the rewards waiting on the other side. And for some, those rewards looked tantalizing enough to make the gamble seem worth it. First, let's talk about the basics. Payment. Tasters were often paid better than many other members of the royal staff, sometimes earning nearly as much as a physician or a higher-ranking servant. The reasoning was simple. You were putting your life on the line to save someone considered pretty important, whether it was a king, queen, duke, or prince. They weren't about to compensate you with scraps. This meant the position came with perks like steady wages and bonus pay if you were lucky enough to identify actual threats before they reached the royal plate. For a peasant, such pay might not even exist as a concept. Serfs worked the land for nothing but the right to stay alive, while you were making a living, albeit under constant threat of death. And it wasn't just about the money, though the money mattered. Some rulers recognized that food tasters needed both loyalty and incentive to stick around. Occasionally, this translated to land ownership, small parcels gifted as a kind of bribe to ensure the taster didn't take their talents anywhere else. Imagine this for a moment. You start off as the kid in the village everyone ignores, staring longingly at the leftover daily bread the baker throws to the churchyard pigeons. Then, suddenly, you're eating at royal tables and being rewarded with land, something that, for many people back then, existed more as a dream than a tangible reality. In even rarer instances, tasters could climb higher on the social ladder if they were particularly skilled or loyal. Some tasters gained noble titles for their service. Titles weren't always associated with actual power, but they gave you an important thing: credibility. You may not have land to match your new title, but you could command more respecter, at least enough to hold your place and challenge accusations of treason or failure. In such a rigidly stratified society, where most people lived and died in the same position they were born into, that kind of shift was akin to a miracle. The profession wasn't just dangerous. It provided rare opportunities for upward mobility in a world where most lives were defined by where you stood literally and figuratively. But the rewards weren't just material. A good food taster was more than an employee. They could become indispensable. Your position granted access to the royal table, and, by extension, the most powerful people in the land. You became part of the inner circle, as close as someone from common stock could hope to achieve. In some cases, your relationship with the monarch could evolve into one of trust, even friendship. The king or queen had to depend on you, after all. At the end of the day, you were voluntary cannon fodder in their personal fight to stay alive. That loyalty could be worth something deeper than land or gold. Take, for example, the remarkable story of a taster in the Ottoman Empire. His name doesn't wander too freely through historical accounts, but what did filter through the centuries was his close relationship with a sultan. It said the taster saved the sultan's life during a banquet by refusing to taste a certain lamb stew that bored courtesans insisted he try. He claimed to trust his instincts, and, sure enough, later testing revealed that the lamb had been tampered with. While most tasters barely made it through their careers unscathed, this one earned immense favor from his ruler. He was given not just wealth but a high administrative position within the Palazzoni that ensured he would never have to taste danger again. Of course, stories like this were far from the norm. For every taster who climbed into the Sultan's good graces, a dozen more ended up swallowed by obscurity or the dungeons. But balance good fortune with reality for a moment. Even with grand rewards or flickers of social prominence, the job came with baggage that even gold couldn't always offset. You were never truly one of the royals, no matter how close your chair was drawn to their table. At its heart, your job was about sacrifice, and people in positions of sacrifice are often devalued, socially speaking. You weren't invited to dance at royal parties, or to relax in the company of nobles during garden strolls. You were there at meal times, and that's where the boundaries ended. Once the food was served and declared safe, you quietly melted back into the shadows, unseen. To them, you were both critical and invisible, strange limbo reserved for people who were too valuable to lose but too unimportant to celebrate. It wasn't just the royals who treated you this way. The court staff had their own views on food tasters, and they weren't always kind. Yes, you had status. Yes, you earned enough to dress above your station if you wanted to. But that didn't erase the whispers. Many viewed you as someone perpetually sitting under a storm cloud of suspicion. Was it possible you were in cahoots with those plotting against the monarch? Why else would you personally be so close to their meals day in and day out? This wasn't just paranoia. Court assassinations were often inside jobs. It was always convenient to start pointing fingers where trust was already shaky. You walked around with a target etched into your skin, visible to anyone who wanted to shore up their own place in the palace hierarchy by tearing down someone else. And that danger wasn't just hypothetical. There are accounts of food tasters whose careers ended, not because of poison, but because of betrayal. In some courts, cooks and tasters had personal feuds, and if an ambitious cook decided that your disappearance might pave the way for raising their own influence, all it would take is a loose accusation and a well-placed guard who believed them. That chef you irritated last week by pausing over their sauce for too long. They could decide your hesitation looked intentional, whisper to the right people, and before you know it, traitor becomes your new title. Here's the thing though. Food tasters weren't fools when they walked into this role. You don't sign up to taste test royal soup thinking it's an ordinary gig. For most people, the risks were clear, and so were the potential rewards. You could live a lifetime in the shadow of the gallows or the glitter of the court, terrified of both poison and politics. But for some, especially those who started with nothing, the idea of royal favour even fleeting was irresistible. The comfort of knowing your family might eat better, that you might have a roof sturdier than patched straw, was an achievement worth risking your life for. Still, the rewards didn't erase the toll. Even with land, wealth, and status to your name, none of it mattered if you spent most of your waking hours wondering which bite might be your last. Imagine the pressure, day after day, tasting meals designed for people who loved security while knowing your own was never guaranteed. Money runs out, property can be seized. And in the end, admiration in royal circles is a fragile thing, easily burned away by the smallest gust of scandal or ill fortune. For every taster, like the one in the Ottoman court who rose to prominence, there were hundreds left, rotting in unmarked gravesore, simply erased as footnotes in palace records. These stories didn't end in medals or legacies. They ended quietly, forgotten. But even those few glints of possibility a life better than you'd ever imagined in your peasant years might have been enough to tip the scales. Enough for someone like you to step forward, pick up that goblet, and take that first sip. No wages in the world could stop your hands from trembling when the spoon reached your lips. But you'd wonder, every time, if the rewards might still outweigh the fear. For most, they probably didn't. But for the ones who risked it all, the gamble was already in motion and there was no turning back. The image we have of a royal food taster is dramatic, isn't it? A doomed figure sagging to the ground, a goblet slipping from their hands, the room erupting in gasps as the monarch narrowly avoids their own demise. But how common was this, really? Were food tasters genuinely dropping dead with every meal? Or was the spectre of poison just another trick of the medieval imagination? Let's strip away the drama and dig into the number such as they are, and figure out if food tasters truly risked death as often as they feared it. First off, a dose of context. The fear of poison in royal courts wasn't just paranoia, it was grounded, at least partly, in reality. Poison was the murder weapon of choice for anyone who preferred their assassinations secret and subtle. You could slip it into a cup of wine, disguise it in a sweet custard, or hide it in a spice-heavy stew. Boutant, it's a big but documented instances of successful royal poisonings are surprisingly rare. Sure, every court whispered about conspiracies, and nobles were hauled off over accusations of tampering. But the actual evidence? Scattered, at best. There are a few infamous stories that make it into the history books. One is from Renaissance Italy, where rumours swirled about the notorious Borgia family using poisons so often that you'd think they had a family recipe for it. And then there's the case of Roman Emperor Claudius, supposedly taken out by poisoned mushrooms cooked by his own chef. But in many of these cases, details are murky, and suspicions often outweigh proven events. For every Claudius slumping over at the dining table, there are 10 royal dinners that probably ended with nothing worse than a slightly overcooked leg of lamb. So where does that leave food tasters? If royal poisoning was so rare, why all the fuss? The answer lies in perception. It wasn't the frequency of poisonings that kept everyone on edge, it was the possibility of one. Poisoning loomed large in the collective imagination of medieval courts, and unlike a sword that requires a hand to wield it, poison could strike in a way that felt coldly impersonal. That's what made it so terrifying. You couldn't see it coming, and you might not even know it had struck until hours, sometimes days after the meal was served. A good food taster wasn't just there to save lives, they were there to save peace of mind. Or at least try to. But let's pull back to the question at hand. Did food tasters regularly die on the job? Not exactly. Historical records don't show a long list of tasters meeting gruesome ends. In fact, most food tasters seem to survive their careers not because the danger wasn't real, but because their mere presence acted as a deterrent. Think about it. If you're a would-be assassin plotting to poison the king, knowing that someone else will taste the meal first kind of takes the edge off your plan, doesn't it? If anything, the fact that there was a food taster sitting there, ready to swish your toxin-infused wine around their mouth, reduced the likelihood of poison being used in the first place. It was a primitive but effective psychological strategy. Still, it'd be wrong to suggest that food tasters were completely safe. There are scattered records of tasters who fell victim to their grim job description. One story from 16th century France describes a taster who sampled wine for King Francis I and quickly collapsed, clutching his throat and gasping for air. The king avoided the drink-wise move, but the taster wasn't so lucky. Cases like these, where a taster clearly died because of their role, were rare enough to make them memorable, which says a lot in itself. A profession that operates under the constant shadow of death isn't exactly running into fatal events every week. The rarity of food taster deaths, however, didn't make the job any less horrifying. If anything, the psychological toll of simply knowing it could happen loomed larger. Every meal was like spinning a roulette wheel. Sure, most of the time the ball clattered harmlessly to a stop, but every taster lived with the knowledge that one dark square could still be out there, waiting for them. It wasn't just about the single meal in front of you. It was about carrying the constant, crushing doubt that someday, somewhere, maybe at some well-lit banquet surrounded by music and smiles, it would be your turn. One surprising statistic comes from the courts of Tudor England, where poisoning was certainly feared but not exactly rampant. It said that, in practice, food tasters rarely died not even once every decade, according to some accounts. If this is accurate, it means the role was far more psychological than biological, a kind of symbolic shield rather than an actual frequent casualty. That doesn't mean poison plots weren't real. The irony is that food tasters didn't just protect the royals from actual poison, they protected the throne from the idea of poison. Even if no one ever got poisoned, the court's confidence in the food had to remain unshaken, and for that, someone still had to take the first bite. What's even more curious is that in some courts, food tasters weren't necessarily tasting every dish or drink on site. Certain meals were considered safe, either brought in by trusted hands or consisting of ingredients that simply didn't lend themselves well to tampering. In those moments, the taster's role could be more performative than protective, a kind of ceremonial reassurance that the royal system was unbreakable. But let's be real, whether they were eating poisoned figs or perfectly safe bread, the stress for the taster was likely the same, and that kind of stress leaves its own marks over time. And then there was the flip side of the equation, false accusations. Even in cases where the food passed through a taster without incident, the moment anything went wrong, say a royal twisted their face at an odd taste or fell ill hours after the feast, the whispers started. A food taster might live long enough to dodge poison, only to end up facing accusations of treachery when things soured for reasons beyond their control. Court records, spotty as they may be, suggest that punishment for failures often involved exile, imprisonment, or worse. The point wasn't to reflect on what a terrible job the court's cooks were doing. No, the point was to reinforce the idea that any threats to the throne were ruthlessly eradicated, even if that meant pinning the blame on the most expendable person in the equation. At the end of the day, the job of a food taster was built on an unstable foundation: fear. Fear of poison assassinations. Fear of invisible enemies lurking in something as ordinary as a cup of water. Fear of suspicion itself, which often proved deadlier than any powdered plant toxin hidden in a rich stew. And though the reality is that they didn't drop dead at every meal, even very often, it's hard to imagine any taster ending their day free of the nagging whispers in the back of their mind. As you step away from the kitchen at the end of another grueling day, you're still alive. For now, maybe you even feel relief, but it's short-lived. Even when no poison is found, the mental battle is never over. You carry the weight of wakeful nights, the growing mistrust etched into your relationships, and the irrational conviction that death, somehow, still lingers nearby. Because truthfully, even in surviving, you're losing chipping away at your peace with every meal you endure. And tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all over again. Every morning is the same technically. You wake up, but you never feel rested. You don't stretch or yawn like someone greeting the luxury of a new day. Instead, you lie there, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing yourself for the next few hours. It's the same routine as always. Clean yourself, head to the kitchen, watch every move the cooks make, and then taste the first spoonful of something that could end you in an instant. But here's the real challenge. After surviving yet another day, After the dishes are cleared and your pulse finally steadies, what then? How are you supposed to live when tomorrow isn't promised? And more than that, what happens when it's not just the food that poisons you, but your own thoughts? Your nights are restless. Even when the feast goes smoothly, the paranoia refuses to let go. You replay every bite, every sip, every moment of hesitation. Was there something you missed? Did you feel a twinge in your stomach after the wine? Was your tongue numb for a second? Or were you imagining it? And if you do fall asleep, your dreams aren't much better. They're filled with blurred faces leaning over you, watching, whispering accusations that blend into your worst fears. Somewhere in your nightmares, a spoon is always halfway to your lips, and no matter how slowly you move, you can't stop it. The psychological weight of the job doesn't just follow you into the night, it isolates you from everyone around you. The cooks keep their distance because they know your role makes you both essential and expendable. If something goes wrong, you'll take the fall. Not them, but that doesn't mean they want to be overly friendly with someone whose job is so steeped in whispers of death. The guards? Same story. They might nod at you during your morning inspection rounds, but you'll catch the way their eyes never quite settle on you, as if you're more a tool or a liability than a person. And the royals? They're polite, sure, because you're technically saving their lives, but they won't invite you to join them at the table, or even glance your way during a feast. You're there, but you're not really there. You're as much a part of the scenery as the carved wooden beams holding up the ceiling. The worst part, though, is your distance from the few people you might care about. If you have a family, they share your stress. How could they not? Every time you leave your quarters, there's a chance you won't come back. It's not like you can reassure them either. What are you supposed to say? Don't worry, I only taste the less suspicious dishes. If you have friends in court staff, those relationships feel strained too. After all, your very presence reminds others of life's fragility, and no one likes being close to a reminder that death could come around the corner without warning. To everyone else, you're a walking, breathing what if. People in your position, even the ones who had been doing this for years, weren't immune to this crushing sense of paranoia. Some developed obsessive routines to cope. You've seen others meticulously double-check their tools, scrubbing spoons to a mirror shine, sniffing their drinking water 3 times before even raising the cup to their lips. Some tasters even carried small amulets or charms sewn into their tunics, desperate for any kind of protection, no matter how imaginary. You can't count the number of times you've seen someone quietly muttering prayers or clenching a rosary during the calm moments between meals. And for others, the real pragmatist, it wasn't about prayer or routine. It was about dehumanization. They trained themselves not to think about the risks at all, leaning into the task like they were nothing more than a cog in the court's larger machine. You've heard one taster refer to himself as the stomach for hire, as if he were nothing but a well-paid barrier between royalty and a poisoned plate. But not everyone kept their composure. There's a tale, maybe a cautionary one, or maybe an exaggeration about a food taster in 14th century Scandinavia who simply broke down in the middle of a meal. He'd been working for a volatile king, someone notorious for his suspicion toward everyone, including his own staff. This poor taster had sampled a roast, nodded his approval, and yet froze as he watched the dish being carried toward the king's table. What happened next is somewhat lost to history, but the gist is that his nerves gave way. He started shouting about poison, pointing fingers at the cooks, accusing them of sabotage. According to legend, the entire feast descended into chaos, dishes smashed, guards dragged servants into questioning, and the food taster? He was sent away in disgrace note for failing to stop poison, but for letting fear overwhelm him. Maybe he saved his life by being sent away, or maybe a different kind of doom found him later. Either way, he became a story people like you tell themselves to remember one thing: never lose your nerve. And honestly, that kind of breakdown doesn't feel far-fetched. How could it, when you're reminded every day of your expendability? You aren't royalty. You aren't even a noble. You're there to absorb the danger meant for someone higher up, plain and simple. It doesn't matter how careful you are or how many meals you survive. In everyone's eyes, you're there because you're replaceable. That word eats away at you, sinking into your mind in the quiet hours when the castle halls go still. Replaceable, disposable. But even in the middle of all this, you try to find some sense of control and, if you're lucky, it works for a while. Maybe you develop something to ground you, the medieval equivalent of mindfulness. There are stories of food tasters who insisted on planting small vegetable gardens during their rare downtime. It was a kind of therapy, They claimed watching something grow, cultivating life rather than facing death every day. Others turned to writing. While most food tasters couldn't exactly afford to be scholars, a few well-educated court employees recorded their thoughts in journals. Fragments of these journals survive, offering rare glimpses into the day-to-day reality of a job people preferred to avoid talking about. The hours are long, the food noble, the comfort gone, one described. If that doesn't say it all, what does? The reality is, even if you find small routines to help you cope, nothing fully takes away the fear. It lingers in the corners of your mind, reshaping how you see the world. You learn to second-guess everyone cooks, vendors, even passing strangers in the marketplace. Trust becomes a casualty of the job. And how could it not? When the risk of betrayal feels as present as the food on your tray, you learn to keep everyone at arm's length. And let's be clear, this mistrust doesn't just weigh on your relationships. It reshapes how you see yourself. You start watching your own body like it's someone else's, scanning for symptoms before they even exist. Did my hand tremble just now? Does my throat feel tight? You spend so much time monitoring for signs of poison, it becomes second nature to question everything your body does. It's exhausting. Worse, it becomes alienating. You spend so much mental energy worrying about invisible dangers that you stop caring about the little joys regular people get to have. Food, ironically, is one of them. Tasting used to be pleasure flavors that delighted or surprised. But when everything you eat carries the taste of fear, the joy disappears entirely. And still, you get up the next day. You push through because, ultimately, you don't have a choice. For most tasters, the job wasn't about bravery or loyalty, it was about necessity. It was this, or starvation. This or a lifetime buried even deeper in the rigid, oppressive layers of medieval society. And perhaps, in a strange way, the job made sense because no one else needed to know how afraid you were. The nobles, the guards, the cooks, they didn't care what ate at you. They only cared that you showed up, sat down, and took that first bite without flinching. But deep down, there's something else poisoning you, something worse than hemlock or arsenic. It's the knowledge that this fear isn't going anywhere. It stays with you, settles into your bones, and there's no cure. Maybe you survive for years. You earn your coin, scrape enough respect to claim a small piece of peace. But the toll? It's there, constant, eating away at you like a toxin in its own right. And you realize the real question isn't whether poison will kill you, it's whether fear already has. The life of a royal food taster wasn't grand or heroic, it was a constant battle between skill, courage, and the ever-present shadow of fear. Every bite wasn't just food, it was a calculated risk, a decision between trust and danger. Think about that the next time you sit down to eat. How many unseen hands show many lives work to keep meals safe throughout history. It's a reminder of the hidden sacrifices made for power and survival. And if this glimpse into the past intrigued you, remember, history is full of roles like this. What other untold stories are just waiting to be uncovered?